Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 47. This week I'm feeling very happy and I can't wait to share this episode with you. I was lucky enough to speak with botanical artist and illustrator Lara Gastinger. Lara is the artist behind the concept of the Perpetual nature journal. This is a very special way of keeping a nature journal where entries are placed on the same dated pages year after year, building up a record of nature in our home place across years and even decades. If you're already familiar with Lara's work, you'll know that she finds beauty in the process of aging and decay, in the not quite perfectness of nature, leaves with holes, leaves that are dry and brown, and this sets her apart from many other botanical artists, because traditional botanical art often focuses on perfection, on perfect flowers in full bloom. Lara's work focuses instead on the story behind the plant and the plant's place within its greater network. Lara explained all about how she keeps her perpetual nature journal and how we can join her in this wonderful activity. Let's listen. Lara, thank you so much for being here with me. It is actually a really wonderful thing to have a podcast and be able to talk to people who you deeply admire, one of which is you.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a delight to be here.
Do you know, many of my guests mention you as a big influence. So this is not the first time that your name has come up on this podcast. So it's exciting to have you, the source of all this wonderfulness, to talk about. To talk about your process and your nature journaling. So it's going to be great.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing how far-reaching my technique has gone.
Yes. Yes. I can't wait to get into that. And first I'd love to talk about the beginning, how it all started. And I wonder if nature and art have been part of your life from the beginning.
Definitely. So I grew up on the coast of Virginia, and so I would go explore in like the tidal pools and the oyster beds. And so I grew up with a lot of outdoor playtime with my siblings. And then when I was a teenager, our family would go to these environmental camps and we learned things about animals and streams. And it was at one of these when I was a teenager, I was about 14 or 15. I took a drawing class with actually Claire Leslie Walker.
Really?
Yeah. And so I remember we learned how to draw poison ivy. And that kind of opened my eyes into like drawing plants and journaling. And then from then on, I always kept interest in art. But then in college, I went to get a master's degree. Well, at first I was a biology major in college, even though I started off actually as pre-med. And I was almost going to become a doctor, but I liked biology more. And then after I did that, I decided to go back for my master's degree, and I got a master's degree in plant ecology. And I took a lot of botany classes there too, and I was going to work towards being a field botanist or a plant ecologist. But then I got an offer to do a job called the Flora of Virginia, and I tried out for that position, and the job interview was actually drawing a plant.
Oh,
And so
wow.
I drew
No pressure.
I drew a viburnum, and I remember drawing the viburnum because it was really hard. And so then I got that job, and I started my plant illustration career for 10 years on that job.
I'd
So,
love for you to describe the
yeah.
job. So this beautiful Flora of Virginia was your project for 10 years. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
It was a fantastic blessing to be a part of that project. I was the chief illustrator, and I drew around 1,300 plants over the 10 years.
Wow.
And most of the time, we would draw from live specimens that were collected for me, or I collected them. Um, and they were just really simple pen illustrations, not like illustration like plates, like formal plates, like because I was never actually trained in that. So I was just drawing the plants how I saw them, and the botanist would have corrections, and I just would lightly stipple them. And I used micron pens. So that was when I first started using micron pens, which I still use today.
Amazing. It must be such a great feeling to have this depth. You know, some people have like a really wide range of things that they study, and you have this real depth, which is like Virginia plants. I just love that, how deep that must feel.
Yeah, I'm really passionate about native plants and naturalized plants here in Virginia. And so I feel like such a strong connection to them.
Yeah.
And through my plant ecology degree and the working on the flora, I really feel like I can't draw anything else. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just like it's in my bones. Like, and I feel like the Shenandoah National Park, which is the Blue Ridge Mountains, which is right near us, is just like part of me. So.
Yes, that's amazing. And it makes me feel like, I think it's wonderful that you can spend a lifetime investigating what is within your small area, and there is infinite depth there. And I just love that concept.
Yes, and then that starts us going into the perpetual journal, how like that
Yes.
is a strategy for people that need to find that connection to a place. It's a way to do it. And so, and I encourage people like, no matter where you are, even if you're in an urban place, you can still do that. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so let's go into the perpetual journal. I'd love to know how the idea came to you and how it all began.
So, it's first started where I had a client and I came up with this idea for them. I said, I'll come to your property, your beautiful piece of land here, once a week and just draw whatever is happening in this book for you. And it worked out great. And it was an amazing project. I would just go to their house, get the book, go draw for 3 or 4 hours, and then
Wow.
give it back to them. And so they had this beautiful object of their property. And then
Wow.
that was genius. And I was like, oh, that was so good. I want to do that again for myself. How can I do that for myself? I mean, it's easy when somebody's paying you. It's harder when it's just yourself. And so actually I have to give my husband credit. He came up with the idea. He got me a beautiful journal similar to the one I use today. And he said, let's set it up where you just break it into weeks. So you date the pages with the week. So you start with like January 1st through 7th, and then you go January 8th through 14th. And then so you just keep going through until you get the whole year. And then you just go to the week you're on.
It's such a good
Yo,
concept.
it works so well because one page will have multiple years on it. And so it's also like really great for beginners. It's great for people that have busy lives. There's a lot of
Yes.
flexibility with it that we can talk about.
Yes, and I think that's why it's so far-ranging, because it's so accessible, because you don't have to do a full page. Sometimes I hear people say that to me, like, "Oh, I can't do nature journaling often because I don't have time to commit to doing a page." But with the perpetual journal, you don't do a page, you do one small
Mhm,
element, and I
mhm.
think that's what's wonderful about it.
But it's also open to like if you want to do like sit down and make something beautiful and very time intensive. Like you can, it has that flexibility. I have some people that always say like, well, how long does it take to fill one out? It really depends. The first one
Yes.
I had took let's see, 16 years because
Wow.
I had kids
Yeah.
and like we wouldn't be traveling like we wouldn't be camping as much and I had the project. So the second one, which I started in 2016, it's done. It's gonna be done
Mm-hmm.
this next year, so a lot shorter. It just depends.
Yeah, and I was reflecting on it yesterday, and I was feeling like this is such an amazing document for just for citizen science, in terms of like the changes that we're seeing with climate change. And I wonder if you have noticed things like that, things that are really becoming obvious through the years, because you've been doing this for 20 years, right?
Definitely. And unfortunately, you do see those effects of climate change, specifically in spring when bud burst,
Mm.
specifically the maples are opening sooner. And also, I mean, we have a very mild winter here, less snow, because I record things like snowfall, and rain. That's why I also tell people you don't have to do drawing. You can also just write down first frost or, you know, temperature things. So, but you can see these things change, or like um, presence of pollinators, the invasive pollinators, or presence of invasive plants,
Mm.
or lack of seeing. I haven't seen a monarch yet, so stuff like that.
So interesting. And again, going back to just knowing your place. And I love that I was reading that you have just the plants in your area in your perpetual journal. And if you're traveling, you have a special journal. And I think that that is very significant.
Well, I never used to do it like that. So my very first journal does have different places, like
Okay.
Ohio or North Carolina and other places we went. And then I decided in this one, no, this is Blue Ridge and Piedmont of Virginia. Um, and I always encourage people when you travel, I think it's better just to focus. Traveling, you have different sort of time for
Yes.
journaling. You might have more time. So just have a special journal. So I tell people to get those accordion journals or something that can be special as your trip.
Yeah, that's really fun to do on a trip, isn't it? Then you have this little thing that is like almost like a photo album, but an artist's album.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm wondering what happens because one week you might be drawing in your journal, other weeks you might not. And I wonder what happens when one page of your journal gets really full and another one's empty.
That is a great question, and I get asked it all the time.
I'm sure.
And so that definitely happens. Like there's a certain week where we are not here, and so it's a tough one. You have to figure out ways like, well, maybe you can, and I never cheat like too much, but like at the beginning or end of a week before you leave, maybe you take some pictures of things and
Yeah.
think you'll add it, or you just try to the next year just try to like make it up or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
It's I've had people say, okay, winter is terrible where I live, and there's nothing here. I'm gonna make those pages shorter in my book. And I say, don't do that. Keep them all equal. And then just force yourself to like look
Yes.
harder, like look at buds, look at lichens, look at bark, and then people actually do find more stuff. And so it's kind of rewarding when you say it's just you got to make a more concerted effort to fill those in. But it
Yes, I
happens.
love that. Yeah. And that's what nature journaling is all about, I think, looking closer and finding surprising things where you thought there was nothing to see.
Yes. Yeah. So we went camping in this area that didn't seem that unique or botanically interesting. So I put on in my head, I was like, we're gonna look for something amazing. Like just it has to be here. And sure enough, like we found I say we because the kids found them, like Hercules beetles with this
Yes.
long rhinoceros horn, beautiful ferns, and like I feel sort of like I taught myself that lesson of you can't just like there's discoveries wherever you go in nature, like near a sidewalk or in a backyard. So
Yes.
you gotta really just look.
And it's so fun to do that search with kids as well.
Yeah, yeah.
I did this fun game the other day with my son and my nephew, and they wanted to be near me while I was nature journaling, but they didn't want a nature journal with me. So they actually invented this game that was called Search. And so my job was to paint things, and their job was to search. And I had to paint something in the journal. And then when I was almost finished, I'd say, 1, 2, 3, search, and they would go up and
I
get
love
something and bring
that.
it back to me. So they were getting a lot of exercise and a lot of nature time. They were doing the looking for amazing things job, and my job was just to paint. It was really fun.
That's great. I think that's a genius way to connect kids.
Yeah,
Um,
my nephew
yeah,
invented that game. That was
I
cool. We'll
love
do that
it.
again.
I love it.
And so I had a 2 page, 2 pages of my journal completely full just from
Yeah.
treasures that they'd raced back to
Oh,
me. It
that's
was
so
really fun.
cool. What a great exercise.
So I have a lot of people who are beginners who listen to this podcast, and I wonder how you approach beginners because your journals are so captivating. They're just so beautiful. You have many, many, many years of experience, and I think that when people look at your journal and think, I'm going to start one of these, there might be a level of nervousness.
Intimidation. Yeah.
Yes, intimidation.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder
Yeah.
how you help
Yeah.
people start when they're feeling that.
Definitely. Well, that is a very common feeling, and people should
Mm,
never feel like they're not good enough to like start a journal.
mm.
And I'll give a few tips, but first, that whole idea that if you start and keep this going, you will get better. And we
Yeah.
all know that. And but the cool thing about the journal is you can actually see that happen on the page. Like you'll turn
Yes.
to a page and be like, "Oh wow, look at how I drew that last 2 years
Yes.
ago. I can draw it so much better." So there's that to look forward to. But you have this blank page. You're really scared. You're a beginner. You have this plant that's next to you. Well, I always tell them just start with like a small part. Maybe
Mm.
maybe it's the leaf that's really interesting, or maybe it's just the flower petal, or it's just you want to just start with a small detail. Do not expect that you're going to draw like a large botanical illustration full of accuracy and like how the leaves are attached and stuff. And then just proceed to like write descriptions and
Mm.
describe it, and warm up with like writing down the date, where you are, the temperature, and then really important things about plants like how many petals does it have, like how many parts does it have, um, on this stem, are the leaves alternate, are they opposite, are they whorled, and then what do the leaves, the margins and shape look like, are the margins smooth or toothed, or is the stem fuzzy? Is it bumpy? And so you can write all that. You don't have to draw all that. And then like if once you get that sort of started, then maybe it will lead you to something else. And we all know how that happens when you think you start somewhere and then it takes you somewhere else and you're just like, wow, I didn't think I was going to end up looking at the underside of this and going down this
Yes.
deep rabbit hole. So yeah, and also it doesn't have to be amazing. I mean,
Mm.
if you watch my Instagram lives and stuff, I sort of like model it's okay if there's a mistake. And I think we all want to have perfect things, and it's really okay if it's not perfect.
I really like that about live, uh, this whole movement to live, because the artist is doing their thing in real time, and so you can see, oh yeah, maybe that's too bright, or maybe that's, and they're making mistakes in real time and correcting them, or not, and I think that's really healthy for artists to see other artists do that.
Yeah. And then another thing I get though is that beginners really don't want to use the pen. And
Yes, I was going to ask you about that.
you might know that I do not use pencil in my
Yeah.
journals. Now, if I was to do like work on a formal commission or a project or illustration for a book, I definitely use pencil because you
Yeah.
have to like compose it, you have to work with the client and all those things. But this is just for me. And this is not going to be like a botanical illustration for like a reference manual or something like that. So um, I use pen only, and also I think pencil can make a mess in the journal.
Mm.
I've had that happen a long time ago when I used pencil. And also I feel that you can actually create more confidence with pen because with pencil, you want to erase it and get it absolutely perfect. And this just, you kind of just go along. But you might know that I teach when I use the pen, the micron pen. It's a very, very light touch
Mm.
and I use it like a pencil where it's like super light, sketchy lines at the beginning. And sometimes those lines get adjusted, and sometimes those lines you can still see them.
Yes, I love that. I love the idea of encouraging beginners to use pen, and it can be a leap for some people. It can feel scary, but I really agree with you that it in the long run lessens anxiety, lessens this attachment to the outcome.
hmm Another thing about like drawing plants in when you meet a plant that wants to be painted or drawn, um, there's probably like something about the plant that like spoke to you, right?
Yes.
And just focusing on that because
Yeah.
um, like focusing on, well, what is it? Was it the pod that was different this week than last week? Um, what is it? And I think sometimes people think, oh, I have to draw the whole entire lupin, right? And it's like, no, you don't really have to. And also, people I think have this feeling that they have to draw something when it's in full bloom. And
Yes.
there's so many other stages and parts of
Yeah.
plants that are so interesting. So,
That is really good. That's really
yeah.
good to hear because, again, when you're looking for what to draw, maybe you're looking around your garden and thinking, oh, there's nothing here today. There's nothing to put in my journal. But of course, there is. It's just a different stage. It's just, it's not full bloom, but look what's happening now. Look what's happening
Right.
now.
Like my
Yeah.
May apples, which they're in my garden, and in the spring they're absolutely beautiful. And now they look terrible, but they have this beauty about them because they're curling and they're brown with yellow and green and some holes, and that's fascinating. And that's what I'm actually putting in my journal, this dried May apple, because you look out there and that's what you see. And so again, it's like not, we're not focusing on traditional beauty. It's sort of like seeking out the unseen beauty. And there is beauty in that decay, you know. So
Yes. In fact, I have a question for you about that because you say you're drawn to transitions in nature and how things change or decay. And in most classical botanical artwork, the specimens are perfect and everything's perfect, full color. But your work, you often see leaf holes and dried and curling leaves. And I'd love for you to expand on that, your attraction to these moments of transition in nature.
yeah, I don't know why it's always been like that. I mean, I've just never really been a flower person,
Mm-hmm.
and traditional beautiful flowers are like really hard for me, like roses and peonies and orchids, but and there's so many people that can do them so exquisitely, but like I feel like showing the holes or the transitions or what's happening to a plant tells like a deeper story.
Yeah.
And also I feel like it also resonates with that, or um recalls those formal, I think it's the Dutch paintings that have the those, I think they used to have like the fly or the hole or the drip or something that indicated that plants don't last forever. So
Wow. Okay.
I think it's like this things don't last forever, and there is beauty in transition. I don't know
Yeah.
how to, so
Yeah, no, it's beautiful because I mean, we do that ourselves, don't we? We have this, our childhood, and then this moment when might be considered as humans like in full bloom, and then we're going through the next phase, and I think it's wonderful to celebrate the next phase as I go into that phase myself.
yeah.
Um, it's part of life, and each of those stages is beautiful in
Well,
itself.
there's also that term, I'm sure you know, the wabi sabi, the Japanese
Yes.
term. Yeah, so sort of the beauty in what might not seem so perfect, and how they lift up things like cracks and things in pottery. And so I love that, like that there's beauty in decay and things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I think it's a wonderful thing to celebrate in your art. I think it's great, and I find myself attracted to. Do you know? I love botanical art, and at the same time, it doesn't sink into me, and I don't know if that makes sense. But like, I see a beautiful picture, and I see it and appreciate it and move past it. But when I'm looking at your work, it's for me, it sort of sinks in deeper. I don't
Oh,
know really how to describe
you're
that.
so kind. That is so sweet.
I just feel there's something, like you say, more of a story. Like with perfect botanical art, there's a beautiful picture, and with yours, there's a story. If that makes sense.
Well, I think a lot of it comes from my background in plant ecology. Like,
Mm,
I think the plant is not just by itself. It's connected to its the herbivores, the pollinators, but then also like the other plants that are near it.
yeah.
And so like during early on in my career, you might know I did end up exhibiting. I've exhibited twice at the Royal Horticultural Society botanical art shows, and both of those really emphasized plant relationships and plant
Mm,
communities. And not many botanical artists sometimes do that. You know, maybe it's a single beautiful species, but I
yes.
love that whole connection of plant communities and phenology, like when things are blooming or changing. And so, yeah. I also love educating people about what's around them. And so I feel like I'm also teaching people.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I was just going to, you're beautifully segueing into all the questions I was going to ask you. But one of them was like, I'm interested in that, like the interplay between science and art, and whether being an artist makes you a better scientist because you're looking at the world in a different way, and whether being a scientist makes you a better artist because you're looking in a different way.
That's a great question. I think it's more B. So I come at this, I think, more from the science perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a really long time to even say with confidence, I'm a botanical artist. Like it really was hard. So, but I feel like I was never somebody that could do like go to art school or something. It's
Mm-hmm.
just like I sort of knew I had to come from the science perspective, but I
Mm-hmm.
knew I wanted to somehow end up in a creative profession somehow, but with science as my
Mm-hmm.
basis. Um,
What was that feeling when you were saying it's hard to say that? Is it because you felt like a scientist, or
um,
because you felt like you couldn't own that without having been to art school? What was that feeling that was stopping you saying that?
oh, maybe it's because my whole family are doctors.
Okay.
And so,
I see. Okay. Yeah.
um, but I mean, I'm so glad of how it's sort of evolved, and I'm so
Oh yeah.
grateful that it can work like this. So yeah.
Mm. I love that the Perpetual Journal is like um, a window for people, or a permission for people. I've spoken with a lot of people who wanted to draw botanicals, but they have maybe tried botanical art, and it sort of instills this level of fear in them because it's got such a structure. You do this, you don't have shadows, you always have the light coming from the same direction, and all this stuff, and it maybe puts people in a place of anxiety. But I feel like the Perpetual Journal is an invitation to draw plants with freedom for your own self.
That's exactly it. And actually, I just had a talk the other day, and somebody was like, "Oh, when I saw your Instagram, I was really anxious that like there's no way I could do anything like that." And but then I did a little demo, and I was like, "You just do it like this." And um, I think that that is exactly right. Like having like an entryway into like improving your skills or learning plants better, or is can be done with this for sure. And I've
Yeah.
seen it. And then what's really cool, I don't know if you have a perpetual journal,
I
but
do you know I started one a while back when I first came across you a couple of years ago, and I had it. I couldn't find the right book, and I kept
mm,
started it in two books, and that just became awkward. I don't
yep.
know why, and so I stopped it. And I have I've since found the perfect book for me, and I'm gonna start it actually like this week.
Oh,
So
that's so good.
I'm on board.
So the thing that most people love is that okay, time passes really fast, okay,
Yeah.
like in our lives. And you'll start it, and before you know it, you will be back around. And you'll be like, I
Yes.
can't believe this. And then once you start to do that and you overlap into your second year, it's like crazy addictive. And like people are just so thrilled. And like some people on that hashtag LG Perpetual Journal have been doing it for as long as I've been on Instagram, which I think has been 5 years, 5 to 7 years. I can't even remember when I actually
Yeah.
started Instagram, but
I
um,
really love that. Go on.
when you started though, I think people get really overwhelmed with like, it's great you found the right book. So I always tell people, um, don't worry about how to date it. Like that's
Mm.
not the key thing here. The first thing is you just got to date with pencil, and this is when you can use pencil in the corner of the pages. Just date it how you want to, and maybe you don't want to break it down to weeks. People do different variations, but just map it down in pencil, and then just wherever you are, like July, where are we? July. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
gosh, 13th.
Yeah.
Just go to that week and just do an entry. Like don't wait until January 1st or something to
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Go ahead and get
I,
something in.
I have to admit that recently I bought a book to with the intention of starting a perpetual journal, and I numbered everything meticulously, and then I don't know what was happening in my brain, but I just opened it to the wrong page and I just put something in, and then I was like, oh, I've stuffed this one.
But also, like, I tell people, so I got a brand new journal and I was like, this one's gonna be great. This is gonna be super. And I did my very first entry in it, and you
Yeah.
know what? I hated it. And I was like,
Yeah.
this is
Okay.
terrible. But here's what you do. You just go on to the next week. And then when you
Yes.
get the next year, well, you'll put something else on that page that's distracting or more beautiful.
Yes.
And so I talk to people about like when they have multiple years on their page, you can like balance the page and distract with like color or boxes or text, and like it becomes a cohesive element in itself, and then you can like deflect from what you might think is a bad drawing, you know? And so
Yeah.
I talk about like strategies to like, hide what we think is a mistake, but it's not really. It's just
Yes. And I do actually believe that um, having those mistakes in air quotes is a good thing, because you you learn to get comfortable with the things that you're learning, and then you go back and think, oh yeah, that's why I did that, or that's why that happened. And I mean, we all have things that are uncomfortable to live with within ourselves, within our own lives. And so it's like a little mini, I don't know if you find this, but I find like life lessons in art and
oh yeah,
nature.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
there's a little mini life lesson about self-acceptance and all that stuff within there.
For sure. And I mean, I also tell people like how nature and specifically what calls out you to be drawn, that it's like a dialogue with that. Like view it as a scenario where the nature is helping you. Because it's like, you might see a vine and the vine's like, I want to be drawn. And then the vine's crawling everywhere. And you're like, the vine wants to crawl over my page. And
Yeah. Oh
so
yeah.
it's sort of, people are always like, well, I don't know where to put it on my page. I'm like, well, whatever the plant is, it will sort of dictate where it wants to go. Vines sort of crawl up off the top. If it's a tree, I have it come from the side. If it's a little plant, I have it come up from the bottom. And then if it's an individual object, it sort of floats. And then I tell people like, use the edges of the page to sort of inspire this like, what else is there? Or
Yes, a little intrigue
yeah,
into,
yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah,
like a
for sure.
window into nature. I love that. I love the growing habit of a plant informing where it goes on the page.
Yeah. And so, and also back to the beginners, sorry, a little rambling here, but like, don't just draw a plant smack dab in the middle of the blank page. That is so frightening. Like, even I
Yes,
don't do that.
yes, yes.
If I was to do that, that would be a pencil drawing with trace paper and working it out. This is sort of, you're just capturing that moment of what you saw, and it can be off the page a little bit. So it's okay if it's not centered.
I love that. One thing about beginners is that as beginners, we're often drawn to just have every color. You think you need a really big watercolor box with all the colors. And I did this myself when I was a beginner. And then you realize the more you do it, the more you get comfortable with color mixing, the fewer and fewer colors you actually need and want. And I was looking at your palette, and you don't have any greens on your palette, and you mix things. You have a very simple limited palette, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, about color mixing,
Yeah.
and how you don't need the whole art
No.
store in your in your palette.
That's a really good point, because I think if people get hung up on like, I have to have this, I have to have that, and
Yeah.
um no, I say keep it simple. And but another thing is, so first off, with color in my journal, I do not use that much color. I
Yeah.
use it in little moments. And so I rarely paint something very, like I rarely paint like the whole page or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so I'm not really adding a whole bunch of color and like mixing and getting it perfect. That's for like studio work.
Mm.
And so I do have a limited palette, and so I have two reds, two yellows, two blues. And so those are let's see, lemon yellow. I guess I used to do cad, but I've switched that
Mm-hmm.
one.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Indian yellow. Prussian blue, which I know a lot of people don't like, but I love it. Prussian blue and ultramarine blue, and then alizarin and scarlet red. So I have those, but then I have the earthy colors that I
Mm.
absolutely love.
Mm.
And actually, I did get those from John Muir Laws, his
Mm-hmm.
list. And I think his colors, like the raw umber, the burnt umber, the
Siennas.
yeah, the siennas, and then the buff titanium,
Yes.
the shadow violet. I don't know. I love shadow violet.
I haven't
So,
used shadow violet yet, but I have. It's on my mental list of things to try.
yeah, yeah, it's great because you might know I use color in two ways in my journal, and one is to actually paint the object. So like if there's a red berry and I want to highlight that berry, I would paint the berry red. The other way to use color is to create a background. And I feel like
Yes,
I've
I
just
love
started
this.
doing this in like the last year where maybe if I don't want to draw the whole plant or I'm trying to just get the shape of a plant or it's a white flower, I use a background. And usually that's one of those like earthy or neutral colors like Payne's gray or shadow violet or sepia, something like that. I love doing
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I saw one really beautiful example of that in your journal just yesterday, and it was some winged seeds, and you had fully just left the winged seeds completely as a negative shape, and but it looked wonderful with the background behind it.
Yeah, and that's a strategy for, so what happens when you keep the perpetual journal is that your pages become quite hectic and filled up.
Yeah.
And there's something about you want to be able to see, distinguish between the years, right? And besides writing the date near the object, you can sort of do different techniques each year. And so I'll be like, oh, I used black micron last year,
Mm.
on this page, maybe I'll use a sepia micron, or maybe I'll stipple it this time, or maybe I'll do a background to like set it off as its own year. So
Yes, I love the idea of using sepia ink and it comes across really subtle and gorgeous on your pages, I think, as opposed to black ink.
yeah, I've always loved the sepia.
Yeah, I'm going to try that out too. I'm excited. I wonder, I know that you work sometimes from a combination of sketches in the field and from photographs. I'd love to hear, like, you describe the actual process of making an entry into your perpetual journal from you talked about letting the subject choose you almost or put its hand up to be drawn, and so I'd love
Yeah.
for you to say like how you do it, how you choose it, and then do you sketch in the field and then bring a photograph home to finish it off? What's the whole process?
Well, it's probably a little disappointing to people, but I do end up drawing a lot from my photographs that I take in the
Yeah.
field. Primarily, this is because most of the time I'm in Shenandoah National Park where you can't collect plants,
Yes.
or it's private property and so you can't collect. Also, so that's primarily what I do. Now, I have a beautiful garden with native plants, so a lot of times I can go out there and draw. But honestly, I probably just draw maybe for 10 or 15 minutes and sketch it out on the page. And then I might take some close-ups of some details and then go finish that at my desk. And I actually, sometimes here in Virginia, it's really humid, really buggy. Um,
Yes.
it's not that pleasant to be outside.
Yes.
And also I like my studio desk. I must say I like the comfort of my desk. Now if I'm camping, it might be different. I might sit next to the plant and draw it. And then but sometimes a lot of times I add color in my studio. I'll even come back
Mm-mm.
here and just add color.
Mm.
Yeah.
I find we even sometimes you've got a little kid helper and it's really hard to take time for that as well. So I do that as well. I'll start something and then I'll finish it at home in my at my desk. Um, I wonder about how your journaling has changed over this time. You know, you've been doing perpetual journaling for 20
Yeah.
years, and I wonder how you would describe the changes in your own style and process over that time.
Well, I mean, I just happened to look back at my first journal and I have and I used to think that was amazing. And now I look back at it and I'm like, wow, my lines are more confident. I mean, there used to be a little more freedom and
Mm.
looseness that I kind of miss. And I'm definitely a little more restrained and tight, um, but cleaner. But I really like the point at where I am with my stippling and hatching and color
Mm. Mm.
usage. So it's just kind of a little more refined. Um, but I'm better at observing things because once you draw milkweed 3 times,
Yes.
you'll see something different, and you'll say, "Oh, this time, look at these ants." All right, and so I've definitely become a better observer of it.
Mm.
And so,
Do you think it's important for people to know or to dive into botany? Or, I mean, do people have to have labels and names for things, or can they just do it without any
yeah.
scientific knowledge?
Yeah, so I used to be a nature guide at this little local area, and they taught us, they're like, the point is not to learn the name of the plants. We don't all need to know the names of the oaks. The point is to, and this was teaching kids, it's like how to describe the oak. How is this different than that oak? What is
Yes.
it about this bark, about this bud, about this leaf? Do you see the little hairs on the petiole? Stuff like that. Like, so it's more about inspiring the curiosity to like just be curious about it. I mean, eventually that could lead to like, oh, what type of oak is this? But that doesn't really matter as much. But initially, it's just more about making the right observations.
I feel like for some people it's important to name and some people it's not, and I guess it's, again, it's for you, it's whatever makes you happy and brings benefit to your life. I do find for
Yeah.
myself, like, learning the name of something helps me know it more and connect to
100%.
it more.
And so me personally, I do like to learn the name, but that's because of my background and most of the plants I've drawn, or I know the family, and so I like that. But then I see people sort of struggling with it, and I'm like,
Mm.
it's not really the point. And
Yeah.
there's so many good apps out there now for plant ID. It's pretty great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what's your favorite app for plant ID?
So I don't know if you have it in Australia, but it's iNaturalist
Yes, we
has
do.
something called Seek, and Seek is sort of the one that you can use on the go.
Okay. Okay, I haven't heard of Seek specifically, but I'm gonna
Now,
look that up.
it did get one plant wrong with me,
Okay.
but it was a mountain plant, so I kind of knew that like something that wasn't so common would maybe be off. But then I have
Yeah.
more guides and field guides that I can go into depth about it. So,
Yes,
yeah.
sometimes an app can give you a direction. Maybe it gets the species wrong, but you're in the right genus, so you're
Yeah,
getting in the ballpark.
exactly, exactly.
And I wonder, why plants? What captivates you about plants specifically?
I always joke it's because they don't really move,
Yeah.
right? They do wilt, but they don't move. Um, that's a good question. I really don't know.
It's just part of you.
Yeah, yeah, it's just always been fascinating to me. Um, and then I did want to mention like how the people are like, well, what is this perpetual journal like? Has it ever led or helped you with any art projects? And I do think that it's really important that like you won't know like how
Mm.
the perpetual journal will be important in your life, but for me, I was able to create that collection of work where I created these compositions of the plants that bloomed each or changed each month. And I used my data, collected data from my perpetual journals to narrow it down and figure out, like, oh, right. So, I'm going to see St. John's wort in July. So next
Yes.
time I come around, this will be a part of my painting. So it's like a way to sort of bookmark and record all the plants you're seeing. So then if it really interests you, you can go back to it.
Yes, yeah. There's so many reasons. There's so many ways that it could be helpful, and maybe you won't know exactly what those ways are
Exactly. Hmm.
in the beginning. But I really, really love. I'm just thinking right now about how we are in this way of living now, which is so instant. Everything is instant, and we're living so quickly, and we want, and even like I'm thinking of politics is like really short term thinking. But this, I just love that you've been doing this for so many years, and also when you start, that you put one small thing down, and the next week you put one small thing down, and you're building something very, very slowly, but with the intention to be doing this for a lifetime. And I just think that is such a healthy way of living and reflecting on the world. And as you say, time passes more quickly than we could even imagine, but that investing in something and thinking, I'm not going to be doing this for one day, I'm going to be doing this for a lifetime. And there's something really special and valuable about that.
100%. And it's like, it might seem to people when they look at my journal, that's unattainable. I can't do that. But you're right. And we always tell kids and everything, just do a little bit every day.
Yeah.
And then once it adds up, like over time, it will be something beautiful. And so it's that daily, weekly, or monthly practice. That's the beauty of this journal too. It's not daily, and it doesn't even have to be weekly. It could just, So.
That's why it's so accessible, because you can just do one small thing a week, and that's doable for most people to invest 10 or 15 minutes a week. And that means that, most people have that ability to do that, which is really wonderful. I wonder about all the details, because you do lots of stippling, like you said, and hatching and hairs. And I wonder if it becomes a meditative practice for you, because that's another benefit, another reason for us to do this.
100%. I mean, and like I was saying, how you might start at one place and then you gravitate towards something else, and it might just be like going into the little hairs or the little details, and that can just transport you for like a moment. And we all know that can be,
it's such a healthy thing, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I wonder about that, because some people do their work really quickly, and some people are very meticulous. And I wonder about that, whether those drawn to this meticulous detail are meticulous in other areas of life. Do you feel like that our personalities as in the rest of life translate to what we do in the art room?
Well, so the cool thing about the Perpetual Journal is I have a range of sort of focus in here. It might look very meticulous, but sometimes I honestly feel like it's very sketchy and messy.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, I do that meticulous detail in my life. I do see it's sometimes appear in here. Although I view the journal as like a respite or a break from the perfection that I'm supposed to have on the studio board. So
I love that. I love that you have your work that's rigorous when you get a commission or something, and then you have your release in the freedom of the Perpetual Journal.
Well, it's just like exercise, where you can't always be doing the Olympics or whatever. You have to be, or it's the marathon. You have to be doing like the cross training and the yoga and I feel like this is just one of those skills that makes people a better observer and better artist. One thing, talking about being a better observer, is that it's crazy how many times I've had a student start this process and they're brand new, and all of a sudden they'll be like, I've lived in this house for 15 years and I had no idea what this tree was in front of my house. And then they find it out and they're just like, this has opened my eyes. Like, and so I just heard this quote the other day. It's by Thoreau, and I really love it. The question is not what you look at, but what you see. And I know there's lots of variations on stuff on quotes like that. But we all think we see green plants out there, but once you actually focus and find something, that's what this book can help you do, like really see the plant. And I know you don't have green right now, but
we do, in fact, because it's very evergreen here in Australia, where I am anyway. Yeah, we don't have. It's interesting. I was talking about this with someone a podcast guest who's from Indonesia, and they were saying that in places in the tropics and here in the subtropics as well, we don't have a very obvious seasonal change, and so you have to start looking, and it's a good exercise. And I guess was talking about how there are things you can notice in the change of season, but you just have to get your eye in. You have to be,
Wow, that's
again, be a close
fascinating.
observer.
I didn't even think about that. I've always
Yeah.
thought of like how everybody has all four seasons, but you're exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. In where my guest is in Java, they have two seasons, wet and dry. And here, yeah, we definitely try to squeeze it because this is a nation that's been colonized. We try to squeeze into the four seasons that the English colonizers brought here, but this concept really doesn't fit in this climate. So yeah, it's
Interesting.
yeah.
Interesting.
Again, it's about noticing what's real for you in your place,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, in that moment, and trying to be extra observant when, like for you, it's in winter. There's less to see, and here in those seasonal changes, it's really interesting uh, to try to be extra observant, to notice what's different
Oh,
now
well,
than
gosh,
before.
I love winter. It's like my favorite. I joke with some of my students that, yeah, I don't I don't like green. I really don't. I don't like green and green plants. As soon as they start to turn and crumble and turn brown, that's more
That's
like
your stage.
that's my aesthetic. I don't wear a
I
lot of bright
love that.
colors and like it's just like all neutrals. And I love winter dried specimens and all that good stuff. Like,
It's so cool. I love hearing that. I want to hear more about your pandemic painting because you've done
oh
this
yeah.
amazing pandemic painting. I'd love for you to talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. That just like happened when I was like, oh, I don't know, people were like, oh, start something, do something. And so I just decided to just start painting like I started with the bloodroot and I painted that in Payne's gray. And then I just just filled up a whole sheet of paper with just my observations and it looked really boring. I might have a photo of it. I probably should pull that out. And then I was like, well, maybe I'll just start another round of 50. And then I went with sepia and then I painted things. And then I was like, this is kind of looking cool. And then I would just, no, I didn't draw every day. Like it was probably like every third day I would add an observation. And then it just became this sort of woven mess of like plants and observations, but I really like it. So
It's amazing. And
it was fun.
yeah, and when you say woven mess, that reminds me of nature. Like, nature is not like one thing here, one thing there in a perfect composition. It is a woven mess, and that is
Yeah.
something beautiful about it. And that
Yeah.
comes across in your pandemic painting, but also in your perpetual journals as well, because everything is melding in a very natural,
Yeah.
organic way.
And everything's interconnected, and it's just one of those things. And also, you just realize how we know so little about some of these interconnections, and we're just, messing it up and all that.
Isn't it amazing you can spend a lifetime observing the nature in your garden, even, and still not know a fraction of what's there and what's going on in these
Yep.
amazing
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
ecological systems that go on
Exactly.
without us, pandemic or not, it's
Mm-hmm.
going
Mm-hmm.
on.
Mm-hmm. But I'm glad that project like it resonated with people. Like they would follow
Yes.
along and they would like suggest a color for the next one. It was kind of fun. And what's cool is that what I painted in there on that piece of paper is similar to what appeared in my book too. So it was like I would draw, the same thing twice. Or
Yes.
I draw in my book. I only paint on paper. So
Okay.
people think I use pen in my paper formal things, but that's always watercolor. I never mix, only in my journal.
Okay. That's interesting. And so, if people want to connect with you and learn more, learn from you, because you mentioned classes, you also mentioned Patreon. I'd love for you to
Yeah.
talk about how people can find you and connect and learn more, and yeah.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that. Yes, I do offer classes. I teach virtual classes, and actually, I really like teaching virtual classes. It's worked really great, and primarily, I teach two styles. One is perpetual journal, and so I'm doing a summertime sketching one, and it's actually going really well. It's 6 different sessions, and each session is a different technique. And the great thing is that you do get feedback from me on your work, and you get to see everybody in the class, their work, and how I talk about it and give suggestions. So that's really helpful. I also just teach pen illustration classes. I don't really enjoy teaching watercolor virtually because I don't think you can see the level of detail
Mm,
that I want to see. So I just stick with pen and journal. But my Patreon is a great way to support me, and it's been just a blessing to have that during the pandemic,
yes.
and that's where people can subscribe to me and get details, more background information about my studio and what I'm working on. And then there's videos, and those are high quality videos of me, what I'm working on that week. And then there's live demos for some tiers. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So I'll put some links to your Instagram and your Patreon and all those things in the show notes for this episode. But I just wanted to say I'm just so excited about the way technology helps us connect, and it helps people find artists to learn from, and it helps artists find people to support them, and also just this,
Yeah,
just
this is
the the
fantastic.
the technology to meet you and to have this conversation didn't exist before, and it's just such a joy that we have this. It's a
Indeed. Hmm.
it's a pretty special thing, I think.
It's amazing. Yeah. I mean, and also Instagram has been great
Yeah.
for me too. I mean, before the algorithm sort of mess things up, but yeah, and that's been such a joy to meet so many people around the world.
Yeah, I have done the same thing. My Instagram is a fraction of yours, but I have made some deep, incredibly meaningful connections through
Yes,
that platform.
yes, for
Mm-mm.
sure. Yeah, yeah.
Lara, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been so wonderful to talk to you.
You're, you're so welcome. I really enjoyed it too.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Lara. There is so much in this interview that resonated with me. I especially love the idea of having a dialogue with nature, of closely observing and listening for signs of which plants want to be drawn, and then being sensitive to the way the plants grow and letting this inform how we represent it on the Nature Journal page. I love the way Lara encourages people to look closer in the wintertime or when you think there's nothing interesting around you. She invites us to tune in and to know that there is always something amazing to be observed, even if we have to make a little extra effort to find it. What I took away from this conversation is that the Perpetual Nature Journal is for you, for fun, for connection, for growth, and you can spend a lifetime connecting with nature in your small patch, and there's beauty in that. As I said, I actually started a Perpetual Nature Journal a couple of years ago, but I felt like I didn't have the right journal, and I knew I was committing to this book for many years, and it wasn't right. I had 2 books going, and so I ended up stopping. But I'm excited that I found the perfect book for me. It's actually a Stillman and Byrne Gamma series book, plenty of pages, and I put my first entry into it this week in honor of my conversation with Lara. It feels like a really special thing to be embarking on this journey with this particular book and with nature in my backyard, and to know the entries in these pages are going to connect me more deeply to this small patch of earth and the seasons around me. I'm really interested to know if you keep a Perpetual Nature Journal and what your experience has been like. If you'd like to see Lara's journal, visit the show notes for this episode and follow the links to her website and her Instagram page. To see Perpetual Nature Journals from hundreds of other people around the world, take a look at the hashtag #LGPerpetualJournal on Instagram. And if you'd like to learn from Lara or just support her amazing work as a botanical artist, consider supporting her on Patreon. You'll find a link to that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.